Hey there, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Really appreciate you being here. So, just quick update. The last few videos that I've been doing have been about the Federal Reserve, or the Fed for short. This particular one is kind of a transition away from it a little bit, but it still involves the Fed. So Clear Value Tax did a video a few days back about the US debt crisis and how the Federal Reserve and the upcoming recession is going to be impacted by the debt crisis. So anyway, yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on into it.
So I'm going to give you a quick history lesson because this has happened before and we came out okay. But it's going to be different this time and I'm going to explain why. In the late 70s, inflation was running at 11%. So this put the US dollar system into jeopardy. So President Jimmy Carter, he saw this as an emergency. So he nominates Paul Volcker to become the chair of the Federal Reserve.
Okay, so the rest of this portion, he's just going to get into a bit of the history of what was going on in the 1970s and basically how they were able to pull out of the situation that we're in back in the 70s. But the situation then is not the same as the situation now. So,
So we beat inflation back then by limiting the supply of money and letting interest rates go as high as 20%. So if you think that we did it back then, so we can do it again, that is not correct. It's not possible. So do you know why? It's because in 1980, the US government had $908 billion of debt. Today, the US government is in debt by $31 trillion. As a percentage of GDP, in 1980, the debt to GDP ratio was at 32%. Today, it's 137%.
All right, so basically what was going on back then and what's going on now is the debt situation was way different. The numbers are dramatically different. And in this next little bit, he's going to get into more of the details as to why that's such a big deal. He's going to break down the math and yeah, you'll see.
The US government is in debt by $31 trillion. So simply,
I've been getting paid $1,000 a month, if not more, just from this app on my phone. And
put, the US government, they owe a bunch of people a lot of money. Rich people, they own government debts. Corporations, foreign countries, pension funds, etc. So the US government, they have to make interest payments on their debts. All
right, so
interest rates go up, the US government, they're going to have to make higher interest payments, so they are no exception. So
yeah, that's a big deal. All right, and that's really the whole cornerstone of the whole video and the whole thought process behind why things can't be different. So get into it a little bit more.
In 2021, the federal government, they collected $4 trillion in income. $2 trillion came from individual income taxes. $1.2 trillion came from Social Security and Medicare taxes. $370 billion came from corporate taxes. The remainder, they came from excise, estates, and other taxes. So $4 trillion in total.
All right, so in this section, you're just getting down to like, where does all the national debt come from? Like, who pays for it? Who's holding it? A lot of it is held by China as well. So that's actually one of the little carrots, or one of the things that China likes to hold over America's head is like, hey, we own a large portion of your debt. One of the things he said a little bit earlier in the video that I kind of skipped over was how should we default on any of our debts or have to pay up? It's not like people are going to be like, oh yeah, whatever, don't worry about it. So anyway, basically time has to pay up. Right now he's getting into all the detailed breakdowns of where our money goes.
Last year, the federal government, they spent $754 billion on national defense. So that's a good...
By the way, that's a very big deal. I guess to put things in perspective, America is I think they recently became the second largest economy. They were the largest for a really long time, up until I think China has in recent years surpassed. But we by far spend the most, more than any other nation in national defense. So most of our budget, as far as I recall, as far as the singular source of what one item gets the most money, I believe is our defense budget. So the numbers he's talking about right here is going to be a pretty big deal.
Good amount. That's about 19% of the money that they have coming in. In 2021, the federal government, they spent $352 billion to pay interests on their debts. So that's very little, relatively speaking, and that's possible when interest rates were at 0.25%, which is close to zero. Again, for every 1% increase in interest rates, the government, they're going to have to spend an extra $310 billion a year on interest. If the interest rate goes up by 1.5%, the federal government, they're going to be spending more money on their interest payments than on national defense.
That is a massive deal. For perspective, most European nations spend somewhere between 2 and 5% of their GDP on national defense. Fun fact, the NATO minimum requirement, like the minimum requirement to be a member of NATO is 5%. And I think, who was it? One of the Scandinavian countries, I believe, is one of the few that actually spends that 5%. So might be Finland. I might be wrong about that though. But anyway, yeah, so big deal. So if most of our payments are going towards interest rates, that's a big old pile of no bueno.
So just think about that. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
Under Volcker, we had the flexibility to raise interest rates to 20% because the federal government had less debt. Now we have more debt, and that is no longer an option for us. So do you understand what I'm saying? The math, it doesn't work out. Raising interest rates to 20%, that's not even on the table anymore. That is out of the question. If we raised interest rates to 20%, that would be over $6 trillion a year in interest expense alone. So raising interest rates to
By the way, our GDP is right around $3 trillion a year. Oh, that's a bad pause. Sorry, Brian.
10%, that is not even possible. That would mean 3.5 trillion in interest payments a year. And again, the government collects 4 trillion a year. If interest rates were 5%, the government would be spending half their money on interest payments alone. So that would leave...
Wait, if we're collecting 4 trillion a year, that means my math, or at least where I got my math from, is apparently a little off. I thought it was like 3.6 trillion was our national GDP each year. So need to dig back into that. So sorry, bad information. I just want to call myself out on it. Either that or Brian's information is bad. One of us is off. He's a CPA, so I'm going to trust his info over mine.
Very little money left over for Social Security, Medicare, defense, healthcare, social services, etc. The current interest rate set by the Federal Reserve, the Fed funds rate, is at 1.75%. They raised it 0.75% in June. So that's why I was saying that it was a big deal. The rate was at 0.25% last year. The Federal Reserve, they're trying to get the interest rate to 3.75% to stop inflation. But you have to remember that Volcker, he had to spike interest rates to 20% to stop inflation. And this time, we're supposed to get the job done with 3.75%. That's going to be difficult. So the sad thing is that
He's underselling that. He's basically getting at that's probably going to be dang near impossible. It'd be really tough to do, if not impossible.
even 3.75%, that would cause the federal government's interest payments to increase to $1.5 trillion. So that's double the amount that we would spend on national defense. And that would be 37% of what the government collects. So we kept just kicking this can down the road, and now we have a problem. So this is the
All right, so essentially what the Fed's trying to do is raise interest rates to a much higher height than it is now, I think more than double. And hopefully over time that will fix the issue. However, because the national debt is as high as it is, in the 70s it was significantly less now, but because of where it's at now, the option to aggressively spike the the interest rates to drop us back down to reality, it's going to be way harder to do if that's even going to be possible at all. I'll let him finish and get to a different point, then I'll chime back in, give my concluding thoughts at the end.
So the Federal Reserve, they have two options here. The first option is...
Dang it, another ad's coming up.
It's to spike...
The wait is over. Gina has been uncanceled. A year and a half ago, Disney canceled Gina Carano, and the Daily Wire swiftly took action.
The interest rate up extremely high, just Volcker style. That's going to create a massive recession. That's going to create demand destruction, and inflation would get under control. It would be painful. It would be very painful, just like it was in the early 80s, but it'll be worse this time around. And the Federal Reserve, they're going to have to make the recession extreme and very quick, because the government would collapse if interest rates are high for an extended period of time, because of the math that I just walked you through. The second option is to say that our new inflation target is 4% now. If you go down this path, I mean, this would be economic suicide over an extended period of time. But either option, it's going to be a rough time ahead.
All right, so in the rest of the video, basically he's getting into how things have times have changed. The only reason why we're able to battle inflation like we have been over the years is because globalization has helped us to outsource a whole bunch of different stuff to keep costs down overall. However, in most of these places, especially China, their average costs of, or their average living wages have gone up significantly. So it's no longer as cheap as it was before, whereas you could still outsource to places like Mexico or Vietnam, where I remember in 2017, I heard that the company I worked for, they were thinking about opening up a factory in Vietnam because you could pay a worker like $2,500 a year to run your assembly line. So anyway, so other things like that are possible. However, the time and infrastructure cost to relocate factories to these other countries is not overly feasible. So there's beginning to be more of a push towards regionalization. I think I'm done with this video. I can switch back. So the push for regionalization is becoming more and more apparent. That's actually a major, massive thing I was pushing for with the Easy Peasy plan. So with the Easy Peasy plan, this would basically address the issue of inflation, or not necessarily inflation. It would deal directly with inflation. The way you could get inflation under control is getting control over the supply side. So one of the big reasons why the inflation rate is what it is now is because supply and demand got incredibly out of whack with each other. Due to lockdown and supply chain disruptions and all kinds of other stuff. So anyway, if we were to regionalize, the cost of doing things would be more expensive, at least on the front end, until companies start investing in innovation and getting more and more efficient at doing the tasks that need to be done. And then having better competition. So a way to do that would be to increase the production capabilities of stateside facilities. So the Easy Peasy plan would address that directly. So it would impose a lot more harsh tariffs on anything that's manufactured or assembled outside of the United States. 100% of those funds would go towards opening up factories stateside, and that would help drive the American economy in the sense that we would become a producer nation again, which is something that we've fallen away from. So do that. It'd help with resilience against future problems like this, so we won't be just absolutely blasted with these future inflation problems. But it'd also create a better job market and economy for Americans in general. I mean, if you got a whole bunch of factories competing for workers, their wages would be better off. And then over time, the manufacturing process could be more streamlined to help keep costs low so that they can have a more competitive product against the other factories, manufacturers, and companies. So I think the best way long term to address this whole situation that we're in is to create something like the Easy Peasy plan, where it would incentivize factories to be built and to be created. So anyway, that's pretty much all I got on this one. Please leave comments below on your thoughts. I know there's this big long debate against the national debt. Is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? Only like boomer conservatives are concerned with it. But I've heard a lot of things one way or the other. One factor that Mr. Kim did not mention in his video was that the average maturation rate, I mean, he mentioned it in his comments, to be fair. He did mention it in the comments. The average maturation rate for most of these federal loans is about 65 months. So about 5 or so years. So in about 5 or so years is when these loans would have to become due. And the possibility of the Fed spiking interest to 20% to do this aggressive Band-Aid rip would be possible in this scenario, as long as the federal government halted all future spending during that time frame to where they would no longer need to take out any loans or borrow any money. As long as the federal government didn't borrow money during that stretch of time, I think we could get away with the Band-Aid rip and do the 20% and just hike it way the heck up. The problem I see is the Fed is doing this long-term bleed out at 4%. And while it's, again, the whole reason why we're in the situation we're in now is because they decided to kick the can down the road during quarantine and started printing off like just jackloads of money. Anyway, yeah, if the federal government can avoid borrowing money during that time frame, oh right, so no, the long-term bleed out, the 5%, that's the preferable option because the federal government would likely not stop spending more money than it rakes in because that's what they love to do lately. I don't know why that's a thing that keeps perpetuating, but whatever. Whole other topic. But anyway, they will continue to borrow and they'll borrow at those higher rates, and like Brian was talking about, they will basically start spending almost double our national defense budget in just interest, and that is not sustainable. So whenever that kicks in, oh boy. Anyway, I hope we don't experience that. I hope this is all just like doom and gloom that's not merited, but we'll see how things pan out. Hopefully something akin to the easy peasy plan will take effect, and then we won't have to worry about this at all. But for now, that's all I've got. This video actually went a bit longer than I was realizing. So thank you so much for chiming in or tuning in. But yeah, please chime in. So leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts. I really want to know what they are. Anyway, apparently there's something up with the chat again. I don't know what's going on with that. Don't worry about the chat. Just leave a comment. Just comment below. That'd be a lot better because then it can be seen down the road by anybody else who wants to click on it. So anyway, appreciate your time. Take care. Stay classy. Bye for now.